These virtual tastings have actually been very positive, very well received. I think that these have a place in our industry far beyond the end of this pandemic, because, you know, before this, a lot of times meeting with a sommelier involved travel, and you know, maybe that wasn't accessible to you for, you know, time reasons, financial reasons, whatever it is. Or maybe, you know, you have a family and a wine trip isn't the first thought for a vacation. So it's nice to be able to have another medium. And this is something that we as a company were looking into before this whole COVID thing ever started. And of course, we accelerated our timeline in March, but it's been very great. You know, I've had a chance to do wine tastings with people who have never done a wine tasting before, and their first one is online. And so it's very interesting. It's exciting to have something else to help to reach our guests and pass along that wine education, because I think especially when you start getting into the finer wines, the education about why they taste the way that they do really helps connect everybody to the wine and to the place that it comes from. We're sort of trying to introduce this concept that is so widely spread in France, that concept of terroir. And why a wine tastes the way that it does based on where it comes from and what happens when the grower makes decisions and when the winemaker makes decisions. So it's nice to be able to share that in a virtual setting. My title at Gary Farrell is the Tasting Salon Manager, and my certification is actually not through the Quartermaster Sommeliers. I went through the Society of Wine Educators, so I am a CSW, a Certified Specialist of Wine. And that is a test that I took in the summer of 2016. So it's been a little over 4 years now. Great experience. Basically what happened was I was working for another winery at the time, a much larger, well-known corporate brand that had not only a large company, but a lot of resources to provide if you wanted to study wine on a more formal basis. So you know, I was right out of college. I started taking advantage of some of those opportunities, started taking classes, started teaching those classes after I had taken them a couple of times, and was able to get the resources to sign up for this CSW exam. So signed up for that in, I think, late 2015, and then took it at the end of summer 2016. I would estimate I came in with probably about maybe a quarter or so of the knowledge that I needed already from taking those previous classes. And then of course, a lot of studying, usually about, maybe 2 or 3 hours on work days and 6 to 8 hours on days off. And did that for probably probably 3 or 4 months, and was able to pass that exam. So it was a great opportunity. One thing that I love about this exam versus the sommelier exam is it's not so restaurant heavy. I didn't necessarily want my career to go into the restaurant industry. I really wanted to focus on wine. And so that's one thing that's a little bit different, I would say, between the CSW and the certified som. Especially once you get into those higher sommelier exams, you essentially have to be working in a restaurant to be considered a sommelier. But with the CSW, it's really more focused just solely on the wine industry. And that's where my passion was at.
So really, you could work anywhere with those kind of credentials.
Absolutely. You find a lot of CSWs working in sales, working for distribution companies, working in education. Eventually you can get up to the certified wine educator and master of wine. So it's fantastic. And I've been working in the wine industry for, let's see, it'll be 11 years in March. So it's been a great ride, and I learned something new every day, and it's really exciting. It's an industry where generally everybody's happy, and that's even your worst day of work at the wine industry is better than a lot of your best days at work in a lot of other industries. So it's fun. I get to meet people from all across the country, all around the world, and just share a glass of wine and talk about it.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you enjoy it so much. That's good.
It sounds like a great job.
It really is. It really is. Yeah. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about just Gary Farrell, talk about the history, and maybe show a couple of these video clips. Gary Farrell, we've been in business since 1982 was the first vintage under Gary as the head winemaker. So Gary was a student at Sonoma State. He moved up here to attend Sonoma State, which is also why I moved to Sonoma County. I grew up a little south of San Francisco. So Gary moved to Sonoma from the Central Coast, and he was studying biology at Sonoma State. And that was really just one of his classes, though. His major was political science. But in biology, he learned about fermentation, just on a basic concept. Yeast eat sugar and produce alcohol. And he was so fascinated with that he decided to start brewing beer in his dorm room, and started his first fermentation project sort of outside the official fermentation industry. And after he graduated, he decided to follow fermentation as a career rather than getting into politics. So he started working under a winemaker who is one of the most legendary winemakers in Russian River, a gentleman named Davis Bynum. So Davis Bynum is sort of like the grandfather of the Russian River winemakers. He's the one that made the very first single vineyard Pinot Noir in Russian River in 1973. And so Gary was working as a cellar hand under Davis Bynum, making almost no money, but learning under Davis Bynum, and just loved that opportunity. And he started making some of his own wines under Davis's guidance. And a lot of the growers that were selling grapes to Davis Bynum started taking notice that here's this young up-and-coming winemaker learning under Davis, and maybe being the future of Russian River winemaking. So one of those growers was Joe Rocchioli, kind of the grandfather of the grape growers out here. And Joe decided, really he and his son Tom decided that they wanted to get into winemaking as well. They've been growing grapes for over 4 decades, but they hadn't really made wine, at least on a commercial level. And they decided to try to get into that business, but there was a lot about winemaking that they didn't know yet. They had made wine before, but not on a commercial scale. And so they hired Gary to teach them some of those sort of ins and outs of managing the space of a cellar, for example. So Gary was able to work out a deal where he'd be paid for that in grapes rather than receiving any money. And that was in 1982. So we got those grapes from Joe Rocchioli, 1 ton. Gary turned those into 50 cases of Pinot Noir. And that's how we launched. It was completely organic. Again, no money, but Gary knew how to make wine at the right time when there were not many actual winemakers in Russian River Valley. We were more focused on grape growing at that time than actual winemaking. So Gary sold those first 50 cases. He made a little bit of profit. He kept reinvesting in his business. And for the first 18 years, he made our wine at the Davis Bynum facility, where he also became the head winemaker for that label when Davis retired. And in 2000, Gary bought the property where I'm sitting today and quit his duties at Davis Bynum and moved all of his production to his own production space. And so we started with 50 cases in 1982. We're at about 27,000 cases today, and a totally organic rise. And Gary is retired. He retired as the winemaker in 2006. So all the wines we're tasting today were made by Teresa Heredia is our current winemaker, and she's been with us since 2012. Fabulous winemaker. We are so happy to have her here. She was getting her PhD in organic chemistry at UC Davis and thinking about going either into teaching chemistry or medical research. But she said that she would be in the chemistry lab, and it's late at night, and she's starting this medical research program. And all of a sudden, here come all the enology students late at night, and they're carrying bottles of wine, and they're having this grand old time. And she starts talking to them about their research and realizes that a lot of what they're doing is exactly what she's doing, but they're studying wine, and she's studying like blood and tissue samples. And so she decided that wine sounded like a much more fun avenue to follow. And so she started focusing on fermentation science and got her degree and started working with Joseph Phelps. She was with Joseph Phelps for about a decade. And in 2012, right before she joined Gary Farrell, she was named as the winemaker to watch by the San Francisco Chronicle for California. And we happened to be in the market for a new winemaker at the time. And so our management team, our GM, Nancy, decided that we might as well start at the top, try to get the best winemaker of the year. And we were able to convince Teresa to come over and join the team. And I'll pull up the map as we start going through our wines. But essentially, the thing that convinced Teresa to join the team was the growers that we get grapes from. Because Gary formed a relationship with these growers before they really had much of a reputation outside of Russian River Valley. Of course, all the local folks knew who they were. But, you know, in the early 80s, there weren't many people outside of the grape growing industry who knew who Joe Rocchioli was. And today, I mean, he's famous. If you drink Pinot Noir from Russian River, you know about Joe Rocchioli. But we were able to sort of form these relationships before they had the great reputation that they have today on the world stage. And so Teresa knew all the vineyards that we worked with. She just didn't have an in to buy the grapes until she joined our team in 2012. So it's been a great ride. She was just in November, a couple months back, she was one of 5 finalists for Wine Enthusiast Winemaker of the Year. She's incredibly talented. The 2015 vintage of the Chardonnay that we're going to try today, the Russian River Chardonnay, was Wine Enthusiast's #1 wine of the year in 2017. That's against all wines, reds, whites, all around the world. So we've got a small shop here, 5 full-time people in the cellar, but we're small but mighty.
And there's you have a lot of vineyards that you buy grapes from. I read that you have 36 different vineyards. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it varies. Each vintage about 35 to 40. So 36 is right on the money. We make wines. You know, we're going to try 4 wines today. 2 of them are Russian River blends. 2 of them are single vineyards. So of our single vineyard program, we've got about, you know, varies vintage to vintage, but maybe 12 to 14 different single vineyard Pinot Noirs and about 7 or 8 different single vineyard Chardonnays. And then we have the Russian River blends that we make primarily for distribution to wholesale accounts. So you find those at fine wine shops, upscale restaurants, and then the single vineyard wines are the 2 that we're going to try today have very small distribution, mostly restaurant distribution, and then the rest of our single vineyard wines are exclusive to the winery and to our membership program. So we have production levels that range from the Pinot Noir that we're going to try today has about 12,000 cases a year. For the Russian River Pinot, we have a couple of Pinots that we make as little as 50 cases of each year. So it just depends on the wine. But we have 2 wines, the Russian River Chardonnay and the Russian River Pinot account for about half of our production. And then all the rest of the wines account for the other half. So much smaller production numbers. The majority of our wines are just available either by visiting here at the winery, buying directly from us, or joining that membership program. Let's see, why don't we we'll start out with the Russian River Chardonnay. So when Teresa talks about our winemaking, she usually makes a comparison to music. So we bring in, as we mentioned, about 36 different vineyards each year, and each wine is fermented and aged as a single vineyard wine. Whether or not it's destined to be bottled as a single vineyard wine, it gets made as a single vineyard wine. And then in February and March, after the wine's been aging in oak for several months, Teresa will go through and she'll start tasting every barrel. It's a fun few weeks, 1,500 barrels that need to get tasted. And she starts deciding what barrels are going to go into the Russian River selection and what barrels are going to go into the single vineyard program. So it's a barrel by barrel basis. And she says that the Russian River wines are like the orchestra. So you have all these different parts coming together that may not make sense on their own, but once they come together, the picture is there. You understand what's happening. So maybe one barrel is providing more of the sort of rich vanilla and butterscotch notes. One barrel is providing more of the freshness, that sippy acidity, citrus, for example. The single vineyard wines are like the soloists. They are balanced on their own. They don't need accompaniment. So they're both fantastic wines. The Russian River blends are often folks' first introduction to Gary Farrell, so they have to be fantastic. How I describe them is the Russian River wines have to be mainly in distribution. So you're trying to please a lot of different palates. So if somebody enjoys Chardonnay, that Russian River Chardonnay is perfect for them. Once you drink enough Chardonnay and I like a Chardonnay with a little bit more crisp acidity, or I like a Chardonnay with a little more oak influence, that's where the single vineyards come into play. They are a little bit more specifically tuned for a specific palate. So usually folks won't enjoy all the single vineyards equally, and they're not meant to, because each one is tailored to a different style, just based on where those grapes are coming from and how the vineyard is different from, say, a vineyard a few miles away.
How long does it take Teresa to do all those tastings?
It's usually about 3 weeks that they taste. So they typically taste for about 2 hours a day in the morning, between about 10 and noon, which is supposedly when your taste buds are at their height, after breakfast and before lunch. There's not a lot of coffee being drank at that time. And it takes about 3 weeks. So we've got Teresa as our head winemaker, our associate winemaker, Brent, our enologist, Mark, and our cellar master, Peter. They all do that tasting together. So there's 4 of them. And ultimately, Teresa makes final decisions, but it's a very collaborative effort. And it's great because all 4 of them have different palates. They all enjoy different things in wine. So they try to come to a consensus based on just the average of their 4 palates.
I can't imagine what that would be like. I just can't. I mean, they'd have to make a decision right then. Every time they do a tasting, they make a decision about what category to put that barrel into, right that moment. And then they go to the next barrel.
Yeah, it's pretty quick. It's pretty quick how it has to be done, but they're well practiced in this. Yeah. So they're finely tuned to pay attention to their palate, which, if you're not used to that, it's a difficult thing to do. You're using parts of your brain that you don't use very often. We find that a lot of times in our daily lives when we're eating, we're tasting something, we're distracted in some way. Either we're talking with our friends or our family because we're eating together, we're watching television while we eat, we're eating something that we're already familiar with, so we don't need to pay attention to the flavor as much. So it takes a special type of focus to be able to slow down and really focus on your own palate and focus on what you're tasting, and it takes practice.
Wow, it's a real skill.
I do have to say that they spit the wine out. I want to make that clear for everybody. They're not swallowing this, although some studies have been done that you can absorb about 40% of the alcohol through your tongue. So what we've got for the Russian River selection Chardonnay is all grapes from Russian River, but from several different vineyards, including the Olivet Lane Vineyard, which we'll try the single vineyard after this. This wine undergoes the malolactic fermentation. It is fermented and aged in French oak. But this is a fresh and crisp style of Chardonnay, and that mainly comes from Teresa's decision to pick our grapes a little bit earlier on the ripeness scale. So we have them coming in, the grapes are coming in with a little less sugar and a little bit more natural acidity. And that's what keeps this wine very fresh, not being overtaken by those creamy and buttery notes that come from the malolactic fermentation, or the oak notes that come from the oak fermentation and aging. This is a very nicely balanced Chardonnay with fruit, floral, herbaceous, creamy, oaky, and buttery, all in balance with each other. And that's what we love about this Chardonnay. How are you both enjoying it?
Oh, that's really, really nice. Lemon, I can taste lemon, grapefruit.
Yes.
Oh, this is great for a hot summer day.
Yes, absolutely. Very refreshing. We love that acidity. It's got a lot of advantages in the bottle as far as having the wine hold on for a longer period of time. So usually Chardonnay and Pinot aren't the first grapes that you might think of for extended cellar time. But these types of wine age beautifully because of that high natural acidity. It's very refreshing on a warm day. Like you say, acidity causes your salivary glands to activate. So it's a refreshing style of wine. And then it also helps with the food pairing. So usually wines with higher acidity can cut through fat a little bit more in your food pairing and lead to a more enjoyable experience when you have this wine with some fish or some cheese, something like that.
Yeah, I was just thinking a nice piece of salmon would be great.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely would be.
And you use French oak aging. You use that quite a bit. I notice all of these wines that we have today are all aged in the French oak.
Yes. So all of our wine, except for occasionally a small, about 50 case bottling or so that goes in our concrete egg, all of our wine sees oak. It's all French oak. We buy from about 6 different coopers. 5 of them are in France. One of them is here in California. They ship the wood in from France and assemble the barrels locally. And they all do see that aging. So we feel like oak is a wonderful enhancement to the wine as long as it remains an enhancement, not a domination of the flavor. I usually compare oak to salt on your food. You got to have salt on your food, but if your food is salty, that was probably a little too much salt, right? It's the same thing with the oak. We don't want our wines to be oaky per se, but we also don't want to remove the oak because then it's missing something.
And you have giant French oak barrels. I hadn't heard of that before. 500-liter barrels.
Yeah.
I know there's a special name for it, and I don't think I can pronounce it correctly. But...
Puncheons.
Oh, puncheons. Okay.
Puncheons is what they're called. Yeah, 500 liters. So it's almost twice the size of standard barrels, about 225 liters. So almost twice the size. And the idea with that is it's a more gentle integration of oak because of your ratio of liquid to surface area inside. So there's not as much liquid in contact with the oak. So you have still an imparting of oak flavor, just in a more delicate way. So that also contributes to that not domination of the wine by the oak. And we only use, depending on if it's the Chardonnay or the Pinot, we use about 30 to 35% new oak on our Chardonnays and about 40% new oak on the Pinot. So the balance will be barrels that are a year or two old. They are not quite as powerful. They don't have as much flavor left to impart for the same reason, not have oak dominate the wine. And
Teresa would have to make a decision then about which barrel to use for which wine and how long to leave it in the barrel and all. She'd have to make all those choices.
Yes, absolutely. So that's why, I mean, so many wines, even wines that are made from grapes from the same vineyard and the same vintage, why they're all so different is because there's so many little decisions along the way that a winemaker needs to make, and that's one of them. What barrel do you go into? What cooper made that barrel? How old is it? What type of oak is it? What toast level does it have? We usually use light toast on our Chardonnays and our some of our Pinots, and then medium toast on a few of the Pinots. But there's so many little micro decisions that get made along the way that have such a dramatic effect at the end on the finished product.
2017 was a tough year because of heat. Is that right?
It was a very tough year. That was actually my first summer working at Gary Farrell. I came over here from that other winery I was talking about earlier. There was a director that I worked with that got a job at Gary Farrell, and she had really been my mentor for about 6 years in my previous position. And so I went into her office before she left, and I said, I'm so happy that you got this opportunity, but I'm really going to miss you. I've learned so much from you. And she said, well, I've got a position for you at Gary Farrell if you'd like to come join me. And so that's kind of how I got to Gary Farrell in May of 2017. We were at the time under a remodel of our tasting space. And actually, maybe this is a good time to pull up some of these pictures of our tasting salons. So this is the interior of our tasting space. Finished this remodel in 2017, July 2017. So at the time, we were in these little temporary tents in the back that had a mini air conditioner in them, but it couldn't really keep up with the heat that summer. It felt like every day was over 90 degrees. There were so many days that were over 95 degrees. We had several week to 10-day long stretches that were over 100 degrees. On Labor Day weekend, 2017, it was 113 degrees on our crush pad.
The grapes.
It's unheard of. I mean, to see temperatures that high. And what happened was, obviously, ripening starts rapidly accelerating when you get temperatures that hot. All of a sudden, all of the winemakers wanted their grapes picked immediately. They said, we need to get these off the vine, or they're going to come in with too much sugar and too little acidity. Teresa, fortunately, she took a little bit of a gamble that ended up paying off huge. She scheduled our picks before that heat wave really hit its peak, knowing that when she scheduled the picks, the grapes weren't ripe yet. But she felt like with this heat that was coming, they were going to get there quickly. And she felt like it would be easier to work with grapes that came in a little too early than with grapes that came in a little too late. And so she took the risk. She gambled it all, and it was a huge success because we got these grapes in at the sugar levels. 95% of them came in right on target for the sugar levels that we were looking for. So the story of the 2017 harvest for Russian River and Sonoma County overall is, yes, very ripe grapes, generally alcohol levels that are a little bit higher, acidity levels that are a little bit lower. But that's not our story for 2017 because of that decision that she made. So we're so happy that she took that risk because our 2017s are surprisingly fresh for what we know about the 2017 vintage. You know, one thing I love about this Olivet Lane is that fresh sort of green fruit characteristic. I get more of a sort of green apple, lime zest, pear kind of profile on here. The citrus is underneath, I would say, the green tree fruit qualities. You do get a little bit of that sort of baking spice characteristic coming from the oak, just a little touch of the vanilla. This is one of the, and I don't want to spoil John Pellegrini talking about his own vineyard, but this is one of the first Chardonnay vineyards in California. There was, I think, only about 500 acres of Chardonnay in California when this vineyard was planted. So it's historic. We're so happy to be able to get grapes from the Pellegrinis over at Olivet Lane. So I'll pull up this video.
My family was in the grape business since the 1920s. Olivet Lane Vineyard was planted in 1975. It's planted to 40 acres of Chardonnay and 20 acres of Pinot Noir. At the time, there were only 500 acres of Chardonnay in the entire state of California. As the vines have matured, and this vineyard is now 40 years old, we think that we're getting a lot more concentration, and the maturity just shows a lot more depth and balance. The most important factor for Russian River Valley is the climatic condition with marine influence, where for grapes like Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, where we get very bright fruit flavors balanced by firm acidity, and that results from the moderation between warm afternoons and cool evenings and cool mornings where fog may come in from the coast and not even burn off until 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning.
We work with Olivet Lane Chardonnay. It's Wente selection, which works really, really well in California. It's one of the preferred clones in all of California. Wente selection produces a range of cluster sizes, but mostly from the small to medium size. depending on the site. And here at Olivet Lane, you can see that we get medium-sized clusters with mixed some, larger medium-sized berries and some really tiny ones. Those little tiny berries mixed with the medium-sized ones give really great concentration and density and structure to the wines. It's also old vines. Old vines produce less fruit, so you get more balanced vine concentration, more balanced fruit set.
We started selling grapes to Gary Farrell in 1997, and previously we had been selling grapes also to Burt Williams and Ed Sellium of Williams Sellium, and also to Mary Edwards. We dealt with people that we had, a good relationship with, and it kind of evolved along those lines. So I guess we made some very good choices in those days. We have put the grapes in the hands of what we think are the best winemakers in Russian River Valley, and therefore their work has helped them to enhance the overall identity and reputation of what we grow here.
Is that unusual to have grapevines 40 years old?
It is, yeah. You start to see generally a pretty dramatic drop off in the amount of grapes that a vine produces at about the 30-year mark. And so at that point, it's sort of a grower's decision on what sort of yield are they getting, and are they okay with that yield as far as how much are they going to have to sell, and what does it cost them to take care of their vines. So there certainly are grapevines that will last a little bit longer than that, Zinfandel being the big one, which is why you see old vine Zinfandel marketed so much. Zinfandel will keep going for 100 years or more as long as you keep taking care of the vine. But most grapevines, you start to see a pretty big drop off at about 30 years. Now they can vary sometimes based on the site, or maybe the grower is happy enough with the quality that they're still getting and the price that they're getting for the grapes that they can justify keeping the vines planted. But yeah, it's not many Chardonnay vineyards that are going to be that old and still producing amazing fruit.
And the importance of fog.
Mm-hmm. Hugely important. It's really the defining characteristic of Russian River Valley, especially in comparison to our neighbors, being Dry Creek Valley to the north, Alexander Valley to the northeast, and Napa Valley to the east. We get fog from the Pacific Ocean. It comes through along the river itself, and then also through the Petaluma Gap, which is an east-west valley at the southern part of Sonoma County that doesn't have any hills on the western side. So it allows all the fog to come in from the Pacific, and it fills up the Russian River every night. So usually in the summertime, we'll see temperatures during the day of about 80 or 85 degrees on average, and maybe 50 to 55 degrees at night. So it's a pretty big swing of temperatures, which is great for the grapes. They really need that. They need that chance to settle down at night, reconcentrate, and get ready for sun exposure and ripening the following day.
Okay. Well, I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah, isn't it fantastic? A lot of times I pour this wine for people that tell me they don't like Chardonnay.
Okay.
Because Chardonnay is kind of a polarizing grape. It has its lovers and its haters, and I think a lot of that has to do with how much is oak affecting the wine. But this wine a lot of times gets mistaken for a Sauvignon Blanc. Chardonnay, I would say, is a very misunderstood grape, and part of the reason is because any winemaker will tell you that Chardonnay is sometimes, in the world of grapes, it's kind of a boring grape. It takes a lot of delicate winemaking to turn it into this amazing wine. Sometimes winemakers choose to hit it with a lot of oak, and that's where it gets the majority of its flavor. We talked about that earlier, and that's a very popular style of Chardonnay. There's a lot of people that enjoy that. There's nothing wrong with that, but not everybody enjoys the taste of oak. And so what we do with our Chardonnay is, we talked about it earlier, make sure those grapes get picked when they still have that lively acidity. And that's what makes that wine so delicious, is that just freshness on the palate.
Pinot grapes the most difficult to grow? Because I've heard they're very finicky.
Very difficult. Any grape grower will tell you that. They call it the diva grape. It is, there are so many difficulties. As easy as Chardonnay is in the vineyard, that's how difficult Pinot is in the vineyard. It is very susceptible to things like mold, mildew, pests. It has a very thin skin, so it can be susceptible to sunburn. It's really a tough one out in the vineyard, but I think that's what makes it so special, is that you have to take extreme care of your Pinot grapes. Otherwise, they're not going to turn out so well. It's a grape that doesn't like a lot of heat, but like any plant, it needs sunshine. So you have to find areas where you have enough sunshine without the heat that usually comes from all of that sunshine. So by the coast is usually a good spot. All about location with Pinot. And that's why there are so few areas in the world where Pinot thrives as compared to many other grapes. So you've got kind of the coastal areas of California, you've got the Willamette Valley in Oregon, obviously Burgundy, the birthplace of Pinot Noir, and some really great Pinot Noirs coming out of New Zealand as well. Those are kind of those top areas right now. All of them having something that mitigates the temperature, be it fog or elevation, things like that. It's also a very low yielding grape. You get about maybe 2 to 4 tons per acre from a good Pinot vineyard. A lot of other grapes will get you 7 to 8 tons per acre. So it's a low yield, which, these growers get paid based on the weight of fruit that they deliver. And the other difficult thing with Pinot is that, most grapes can be blended with other grapes, right? Whether or not the wine is actually labeled as a blend. In the United States, you only have to have 75% of the grape that it says on the bottle in order to call it that grape. So Cabernet Sauvignon, for example, could have up to 25% Merlot blended in, and they would never or not necessarily have to put that on the label. Not that they're trying to hide it. If you did a little bit more research, it just might not be on the label. But with Pinot Noir, there aren't any other grapes that are similar enough that you're going to blend them together, at least for a fine wine. So if the Pinot that you have is flawed, the wine is ultimately flawed. You can't do anything to help it along. Like, say, maybe your Cabernet needs a little bit more fruitiness to it. That's where the Merlot comes in, or you need a little bit more tannin. Maybe you blend in some Cabernet Franc or some Petit Verdot. You can't do that with Pinot. It's all pretty much always 100% Pinot Noir, and you've got to make sure that those grapes are amazing. Otherwise, your wine is not going to be amazing. So many difficulties with it, both in the vineyard and in the cellar.
So this is one of the Pinot Noirs that you sell in restaurants and retail stores, because you make a bigger production of this particular one.
Yes, this is our #1 wine by production. It accounts for about 12,000 cases. And this is, yes, oftentimes people's first experience with Gary Farrell, because this is available in wine shops and restaurants. So very similar to the Chardonnay style, we make this Pinot Noir for anyone who enjoys Pinot Noir. It's got the fruit characteristics. It's got some of those earthy and savory qualities that are so famous in Pinot. It's got a little bit of everything. And then when you move to our single vineyard portfolio, that's where you tend to find, okay, I'm a person who likes Pinot Noir that's more earthy and more savory, or I'm a person who likes Pinot Noir that's more fruit forward. That's where we can get a little bit more specific, is with the single vineyards.
Now, how many different Pinot Noirs do you make? Because I know it's a big number.
Yeah, we've got like 12 to 14 different single vineyard Pinots that we make. There's quite a lot. Yeah, a lot of very famous names in Russian River vineyards that we get grapes from. Rocchioli Vineyard, Bacigalupi Vineyard, the Hallberg Vineyard that we're going to talk about in a moment. Really just some of the best Pinot that you can get in Russian River. And we're so fortunate to be able to work still with these growers and get access to this amazing fruit.
And this one is from 8 different vineyards, I read.
Yes. Yeah. So this is part of that orchestra. So you have, maybe the Bacigalupi Vineyard is providing more of the spice, and the Hallberg Vineyard is providing more of that sort of dark fruit, deep color the Rocchioli vineyards providing some of the kind of subtle savoriness as well. So it all kind of comes together and forms this beautiful orchestra at the end. A funny story that I like to tell is that a lot of times during harvest, you know that the workday is over when you see the winemakers out back drinking beer because they've been working with wine all day. You know, they're not interested in relaxing with another glass of wine, right? It's work at that point. So they're drinking beer, and I'll tell you, they're not drinking great beer because they're not drinking beer because they're really into it. They're just drinking it because it's refreshing, it's light, and it's different from everything they've been tasting. So they're not going for those craft IPAs. They're going for that American lager that just sort of goes down like water. You know, there's a saying, it takes a lot of good beer to make good wine. Kirk Laka is the owner and vineyard manager of Hallberg, and he is fantastic. We'll show the video here in a moment, but he is about as stereotypical Sonoma County grape grower as it gets. And you're going to see just from his dress and the way he talks, he's a farmer through and through. And one of the things that I love about wine is that it gives us a chance to connect a little bit more to the farm, where so much of our food originates. And we just don't think about it so much in our everyday lives anymore. We're so removed from the idea of the farm, but it all starts there. And I think there's a myth that farming is somewhat easy. It's just like, oh, you go, you plant it, and you do the work, and it's, you know, whatever. Not only is it an incredible amount of labor, but the knowledge that you have to be a good farmer and to react to things that are happening in your soil or happening with the weather or pests that are coming in or whatever it is. I mean, these are brilliant people that do this farming. And when you hear somebody like Kirk talk, you know, you might see him and think one thing, but then when he starts talking, you realize, oh, he's a scientist. He just works in a vineyard, not, you know, in a lab. But that's there's so many great things that they do at the Hallberg Vineyard. The science being one of them. Another thing that I love is that Kirk employs his own vineyard crew, and he employs them year round. He gives them competitive wages, health benefits, things that are very rare in the grape growing industry. So he takes care of his people.
Site is terribly important when you want to make quality Pinot Noir. It's a combination of things. So you need a site that is well drained, usually on a hill. And we're at the top of the hill right here, so water drains into both watersheds. Pinot Noir does not like heat. This hill, it has a natural flow of cool air that comes from the ocean because we sit so high. Soil imparts a lot of flavor. Same clone, same rootstock, different qualities, characters come through. We're on a Gold Ridge sandy clay loam.
It's so different from the rest of the vineyards that we work with. It's a different climate. It's a cool climate. And so the characteristics are extremely different from the stuff within the heart of the Russian River Valley. Out here, you get darker blue fruit flavors, and over in the Russian River Valley along West Side Road, Rocchioli, for example, you get more red fruit characteristics, less earthy flavors, more floral. Out here, you get the more serious, bigger, robust flavors. So this is what makes Hallberg special.
Hallberg is very distinct in how it tastes versus some of the other wineries and vineyards that are even within a couple of miles of here. And Perched can take each vintage and blend them a little bit different each year so that it's consistent Hallberg flavor every year.
Kirk and I have a really special relationship. We can joke with each other. I can ask him to pull leaves the way I want him to pull leaves. I can ask him to drop fruit the way I want to, and most of the time he'll say yes.
I like calling myself a paint salesman. I provide a palette of flavors for her to work with so that she can blend them to make the kind of wine she wants to make. She is a wonderful winemaker. She knows how to make a Pinot Noir. They're finesse, they're elegant, they're charming wines, and I'm really enjoying working with Perched. I am very comfortable selling grapes to Gary Farrell Winery because they have the same goal as I do. Top quality fruit, top quality wines, they go hand in hand.
We purchased grapes from another vineyard that he owns called McDonald Mountain. And in that one, he talks about him and Teresa's relationship and how she figured out a way to approach an ornery old grape grower like him. And he said, you know, I don't have this kind of relationship with any other winemaker that I work with. And Teresa likes to tell a story of when they first met in 2012. And you saw Kirk. I mean, he's a big guy. He's tall. He's kind of strapping guy, and he kind of drew himself up to his full height. And he looked at our GM, who was introducing him to Teresa, and he goes, "She's not going to try to tell me how to grow my grapes, is she?" And that was kind of the start of their relationship. So Teresa kind of comes in going, "Oh man, I'm going to have to kind of work with this this guy who already doesn't seem to like me," but she figured out how to crack him. And one of the great things about this wine, that Hallberg Vineyard is dry farm. There is no irrigation provided to the grapes. So what that means is the vines have to, obviously they need water, but they have to go search for it from the water table. So they dig their roots down about 15 feet through the soil. You heard Kirk mention that the soil they have there is called a Goldridge sandy loam. That is, Kirk would probably call it moon dust if he wasn't on camera. That's exactly what it looks like. It's this fine gray powder that, as far as water draining to the water table goes, it drains through that soil relatively quickly. And it's loosely enough structured that the vines can dig their roots down about 15 feet down to drink from the water table. So it's great because Kirk doesn't have to provide the irrigation, so his water bill is low, which is nice. And those grapes are a little bit smaller because each one contains less water. So all the juice is much more concentrated. And that's one of the beautiful things about this wine. There's so much flavor here. Like Teresa talked about, deep, dark fruits. I would say, more black fruit in here than red fruit. Some of those kind of savory characteristics in this one, I think tea leaf is the one I get the most of. And it's such a long, elegant finish that comes from all that great natural acidity that we've been talking about throughout. It's really a defining characteristic of all Gary Farrell wines is our natural acidity.
Cherries.
Yeah, like deep black cherry, plum. It's got some of that kind of cola-like spice that's so common in Russian River Pinot. People use cherry cola to describe flavors a lot of the times. I think this one definitely hits that nose.
He has about 100 acres. Is that right?
Yes.
Does he plant all Pinot Noir?
At Hallberg, yes, I believe it is all Pinot Noir. At least that's all we get from them. Although the Emeritus Winery does make a few other wines, so it's possible that they have other grapes there. But all we get from them is the Pinot. And they have this vineyard, and then the other vineyard that we source from that they own is called McDonald Mountain, and they've got Pinot up there as well.
I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about your wine club.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a great wine club. What I love about it is that you have some flexibility in what wines you receive. So we have 3 different membership options. Each one ships out 3 times a year, so it's not too much wine. And the bottle quantities range at 4 bottles, 6 bottles, or 12 bottles. There's a different savings depending on which membership you choose. And then with the 6 and the 12 bottle options, you can select exactly what wines you're getting, which is nice. There are some wine clubs that you can pick what you get, but a lot of wine clubs, it's chosen by the winery. And so hopefully you like everything you're going to get. But we find that a lot of times people want just Pinot Noir in their club shipments, or they want just Chardonnay. And that's great, where we can be flexible there. So with either the 6 or the 12 bottle option, what we do is pre-select a shipment that we would send if you don't want to make decisions. Sometimes decision fatigue sets in, or sometimes you just want something different and new. So, hey, surprise me. So we'll make a decision, and then we'll email you what that shipment is going to look like about 2 weeks before we actually ship it out. So you have 2 weeks to go in and click on this link. It's super easy. You do it all online, and you say, I don't want to receive those wines. I'd rather receive these. And you make your own selection. So you can go all Pinot, you can go all Chardonnay. If I was choosing, I would probably go Pinot heavy in the winter shipments and Chardonnay heavy in the summertime. But it's whatever wines you're into, that's what we'll send you. Every once in a while, we'll have somebody who chooses 6 of the same wine for their shipment, and that's totally fine. You know what you like, don't have to apologize for that.
Well, that's great. You're so flexible.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's we find that it's a great way to go, especially considering we just have so many different wines, and they're good for everybody, depending on what type of wine you like. There might be some single vineyards that are better for your palate, but we don't want to group everybody into the same shipment. So you always have that flexibility with those top 2 club options to choose exactly what you're going to receive. So 6 bottles of wine 3 times a year. It's a bottle and a half a month. Not that much. We do take reservations. We are pretty much by reservation only. If there are reservations available that day, we certainly wouldn't turn anybody away, but oftentimes, especially due to our limited capacity because of COVID protocols, we are full. So we always recommend either giving us a call. You can email our concierge, or our website has an online reservation system as well with all of the available times.
You have a great website. It's really nice.
Oh, thanks. We just redid that about a year or 2 ago. Did a full renovation on the website too, to go with the renovation in the tasting salon. Member events that are closed just for our members, and then we do have some publicly available events as well. The big ones are in February and October. So in February is the crab dinner. So it's crab season right now, just opened December 23rd this year. So everybody gets the full crab, and you get the lemons and the crackers, and everybody is cracking. There's shells flying everywhere. It's a ton of fun. It's a big long table down our barrel room, and really gorgeous. And then in October, we have our harvest dinner. And the culinary fare ranges for that. We've done paella before. We've done like a kind of a classic Southern feast with fried chicken and ribs, and all sorts of different menu items for the harvest dinner. It varies each year. We try to make sure that our events are, not just, great food and great wine, but great people as well, and a chance to meet some new friends and just socialize. And I guess just one other thing I would want to add is that, sometimes we hesitate to mention it in Sonoma County, but there's been so much in the news about fires in Sonoma County recently. And I just want to reassure everybody that when you come to Sonoma County, unless you go looking for fires or fire damage, you're not going to find it. These are in rural areas. These are areas that you're not going to see, and that life is not as affected by fire here as you would think just watching news reports around the country. There is no fire that you can see from our terrace, and you can see for miles off of our terrace here. Beautiful forests, and the vineyards are great. It's something that you can not have to worry about when you come to Sonoma County. It's not like you're visiting a disaster area. It's still beautiful. There's life goes on,
Well, thank you for clarifying that, because I know you hear about on the news, you don't really know what's going on.
Right. People, I think, don't understand how large Sonoma County is, and exactly where this is all happening. So of course, there have been homes lost, there have been lives lost. Of course, it is a challenge, but I think from a visitor standpoint, when you come in, it's not a challenge when you're visiting here. And it's so beautiful, in Sonoma County, you can go out on the coast and experience that scenery and have amazing seafood. You can come inland and experience the redwood forests and, world-class restaurants, Michelin starred. You go into Napa, even more of that. So it's a wonderful place to be. You've got all the outdoor activities. You've got the wine scene, the beer scene, the food scene.
Okay,
there's just so much.
We get it. We got the idea.
Tagline is for Sonoma County is "Life opens up." Really nice to meet you both, Paul and Lane.
Thank you.
All right.
Stay safe. Happy New Year.
Okay. Happy New Year to you. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.